recording this as well, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right.
And really that I think that that's how most people. Okay, so here we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Sales Rebellion's virtual session. So glad you can be with us. Hope you've been enjoying the event. We have so many great things. I can't even begin to name them all, but today we have an extra special guest. Today we have Paul McCarthy from Paul Mac Leadership. Paul is someone who is near and dear to our heart, is someone who we're fixing to start some special partnerships and content and coming out with just some of this philosophy to help drive leadership in the direction that it needs to go, right? And I love his title here, How to Reinvent the Future of Leadership. And so Paul's going to tell you a story, incredibly gifted, incredible amounts of knowledge. And so I'm excited, honestly, to sit back and hear what you got to say. Paul, welcome to join us today. Tell us how you're doing.
Oh my word. I've just started the timer. So I know that I can talk for ages and ages on this, but you've given me an hour and I'm going to use the time really, really wisely. I also don't know the format of this and other speakers, but if we get through this conversation and people want to contribute and, in the chat box or, however many we've got, I don't know, but super excited to be here. I've been explaining to Beth and Jeff backstage that it was a 7-hour drive for me to get here. I did a full day of client delivery yesterday and on very, very relevant topics to what we're going to be talking about now. And 7 hours, I got here at 1 a.m. and it's now 7:30 a.m. for me. So I'm super pumped because I believe so much in what you guys do, the Rebellion. And I'm just feeling very fortunate and blessed, Jeff, at the moment.
Well, thank you so much.
Part of this. So.
Yeah, it is exciting. And I know that everybody listening. And so I think we've got about 10 people in the room. I do know that a lot of people are coming back and listening later, right? Because you can get access and stuff like that. But I think that everyone listening will clearly see how Paul's story and Paul's perspective are really, really very much in tandem to what we're doing. So I'm excited, man. I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, for those listening and those listening on repeats, my aim is to try and do something and give you some new information. When you leave this conversation, I'm trying to promise that you will know at least one new thing from what I'm talking about. And it's a very dense topic, but I want to kind of talk to you about the future of leadership and basically the fact that we need to reinvent our approach to the future of leadership. And people say to me, what do you mean? And it's quite simply that our approach to leadership doesn't work. It's broken, it's ineffective at best, and it's broken really at its core. And so today I'm going to talk to you and with you about a different, quite rebellious, counterintuitive approach, which is more of a philosophy and mindset and a set of tools and frameworks to reinvent the future of leadership by having different conversations. So central to running through this whole conversation will be the idea that we need to reinvent the way we identify, recruit, onboard, and develop leaders. So as you're listening to this, start to think about how you can take some of the concepts that I'm going to provide into your own organizations. I don't know where you're from, the organizations you work in, whether you're at leadership level, whether you're entry level, whether you have an ability to influence the future and the strategy of leadership. But it doesn't matter because I've given some tips and techniques for people that are in leadership positions that want to do something with what I'm saying, as well as those in day-to-day grinding kind of roles where, we've got to pay the bills and we've got quotas and targets. I've been in your shoes, so I know the pressures and the stresses that we're under. So having said all that, we're going to chat about a few things today, and hopefully you can still all see my slides. Give me a thumbs up in the chat box, whoever's here, if they can. But everyone's got a story to tell. So I'm going to tell you my story, and it might surprise you. So stay tuned. There's a lot coming from the story, which is kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I didn't realize I was going to accidentally stumble on this concept of leadership being broken. So I'll explain a little bit about that. I want to tie a lot of what I'm talking about to the Rebellion's values as well. And so, as Jeff mentioned, we're very in sync in our philosophies, in our approaches, and our values. And being grounded in something is critical. I mean, really critical when you're doing something that's changing the game, when you're changing the world, when you're creating wonder, when you're inspiring others. You have to have some type of grounding. And I'll explain what my grounding is, and you'll see the connections between the rebellion and what I'm doing. Talked about leadership's broken. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail and give you some stats and facts and relate it to the conversation that you may not be aware of and that might actually make your hair turn grey when you think about the reality of where we're at. I'll start to introduce fired leadership and what that's all about. So stay tuned for what's under the hood, so to speak. But again, as I said, I want to make this practical, giving you some tips and techniques as you go away from here, because yeah, I know what it's like. You come to a conference, you're so busy, you're checking your emails, you've got break time, you check more emails, you've got things piling up. And then you've got some fantastic speakers that you've been listening to and some work in the conversations and the breakouts. And it's saturating. So I want to give you some stuff, and Beth and Jeff, we can share this deck after with participants. So if people want to take notes, they can. Don't feel you have to take notes. Please just be in the conversation with me. I know it's a bit one-sided at the moment because I can't see you. I love to interact with the audiences. So that's why I encourage you to use the chat box as we get going. I don't know the policy for taking you off mic and having some people say something, but I'd love to as well. And then I want to give you an invitation to reflect on what you've heard. Again, lots is coming, lots will be in your brain. Average human has about 68,000 thoughts a day. We can only process 32, of which we can only process further than that 4. So give yourself a break. If there's so much coming at you, the human brain, 5 of them actually, wasn't designed to be able to take so much so quickly in. So you'll need time to reflect. I'm going to tell you 2 stories at the end. Yeah, just hit the raise hand. Great point, Beth. If you want to chat directly with me, no problem. Lots of practitioners and thought leaders in this space are one-way traffic, and they put stuff out and never engage. That's not me. Paul Mac leadership isn't like that. We engage people directly. So I want to tell you a story about Mr. C and the Wolf, and I know you're going to see some parallels and synergies with your own experiences there. And tell you a little bit about what's coming next. If you want to follow me, if you want to see what I'm up to, stay part of the movement that we're creating, give you some information, all of that. All right, the beginning. How did it all start? All right, so I've got almost 30 years experience in leadership, and I've kind of been the guy that was sent into household name clients like these on the left that you can see to develop their leaders. You know, first line leaders, entry level leaders, functional leaders, seasoned leaders, board level leaders. You name it, I've done it. I've designed, I've developed, I've implemented, I've reviewed programs all around the world, and I was good at it, and I am good at it, and I get to the heart of the conversation, which is to understand the learner's needs, and I fit everything around the learner's needs. I put myself in their shoes, and I think differently about developing leaders than the cut and paste cookie cutter approaches that are sometimes often out there when advocates of people in social media where they speak so much about one-way kind of leadership development programs. I'm interactive with my audience, my clients. And the most strange thing happened to me after 25 years plus in this industry. So I was working in consulting firms, the big consulting firms that you'll see in a minute. And I was fired 4 times from 4 different executive leadership roles. And I was fired for actually demonstrating the qualities that I was hired for. So think about that just for a moment. Just think about it. I'm going to give you some pause moments throughout this conversation. Think about it. I was hired to display some leadership qualities. And when I displayed them, I was fired for displaying them. And I was fired from these companies on the right-hand side that you see here. I can't talk too much about this because some of these have slapped, non-disclosure agreements on me and settlements out of court because I proved that in all of these cases that the reasons that I was fired were illegitimate. And so just think about that. Right. So what happened next? I mean, well, for those that are on the call, there's 10 of you I see in the session, and Jeff and Beth, I think you'll relate to this as well. Being fired isn't cool. It's a taboo subject. People don't like to talk about it, right? And it's a despair. We've got bills to pay, and people start to get really jittery and nervous. And often the typical response to being fired is two things. One is take that off your resume, massage your resume like it never happened, or pretty it up. We've all done it. And the second thing is we go to a self-help shelf in a bookstore. Remember those bookstores? And we get a book on how to cope with being fired. Well, my reaction was quite different. I celebrated it. I actually started to think, I wonder, I started with this question in my mind. I wonder if we are firing the leaders that we need to manage and navigate ongoing disruption. Again, another pause moment. Think about that. This was 4 years ago. Are we firing the leaders that we need for ongoing disruption and to navigate what's coming? I didn't know COVID was coming at that point. And all of a sudden, this idea started to grow in my mind. So I got really curious, right? This crazy idea, this hypothesis in my mind was I needed to find out if the way that we identified, recruited, onboarded, and developed leaders worked or not, right? And on the left-hand side, some really strange things started to happen. From the left with these icons going to the right, I had people say, aren't you concerned that that's going to damage your reputation? You've done so much great work with these clients over your career. Are you worried about your reputation? No. Do the math, the calculator symbol there. This might not actually generate any commercial opportunities. Why are you doing this? This was what I would get from people. Nobody, that'll never work. How many times have you heard that? That'll never work, right? Why have you got ideas above your station, right? Then the best one of all, the academics came in and said, this is rebellious. This is disrupting our 50 years worth of research, what you're trying to uncover. Nobody's talking about it. Why would you be that troublemaker, right? It'll never work. All right, this was 4 years ago. And then the clock there which is kind of like, why are you wasting all this time on this conversation, right? Again, it'll never work. And this stethoscope at the end, Beth, if you're still listening in, I realized I told you my story was quite a painful one. All of this was painful, but particularly this point, because when you try something new and you're different and you're ahead of the curve and you're not the mainstream and you're not the laggards, you're the early adopters, and you've got this idea and it's going to work, but people aren't there yet. People start to walk away from you. So friends that I'd had, family members, romantic partners, they were like, why can't you just stay in a 9-to-5 job? Why do you have to upset the apple cart? That'll never work. So we never worked. And so I parted companies with a few people in my life because they thought this idea was too crazy. I was too renegade. Well, fast forward 4 years later, I'm going to start to explain where we're going with this. And much more interest is happening. So those scholars, those leadership gurus, those people that said it will never work, two things are starting to happen and have been happening. They're starting to give credence and credibility to my work. In fact, they're starting to leverage my work. I have a lot of New York Times best-selling authors, leadership scholars, practitioners, TED speakers, Thinkers 50 people, as you'll come on to see in a minute, now in my network. Those people 4 years ago were telling me that'll never work. And so I'm not bitter and twisted or anything about that, because I'm grounded in what grounds me, which I'll talk about shortly. And I'm doing what I'm doing to create a movement. And so I'm flattered that a lot of people would kind of question and discredit the idea to only now start to support it. So now we've developed a practice around it, which is commercially generating revenue and opportunities, but more importantly, impact. It's creating impact. It's creating a difference. And so now we've got people coming out of the woodwork saying, I really love what you're doing. Can you tell us how you do it? Can you come and speak with us? Can you give us a diagnostic of how organizationally ready we are for this stuff? Can you help us understand why we're not functional as a leadership team? Can you help us understand and audit our leadership programs and improve the way we lead? All of this, by the way, was pre-COVID, right? So the things I'm doing have just become accelerated in the time that we're in now, and people are starting to talk about it more. So we went from this kind of skepticism that'll never work to, now I'm out there in the social media land. By the way, I'm not a social media fan personally, but the work we're doing is so important to raise impact and awareness that I have to get this message out. So it started with a few of these sketch notes. And so you can see on the screen on the left, I put this post out. For both of these sketch notes, my hashtag, if you want to write this down, it really works. Trust me, guys, girls, it really works. Hashtag focused hustle. Focused hustle. Right? To the world, you look erratic and crazy, like you don't know what you're talking about. But behind the scenes, you've got this very clear strategy and approach to changing the world, because that's what I'm doing. I'm changing the world. And all of you are changing the world in whatever you're doing. I don't know what you're doing, but in every individual area that you have, you're doing something different to have an impact, to make a difference. And so I recruited India's top 50 HR influencer, Tanmay Vora, a super cool guy. Go on LinkedIn, you'll find his work. He's amazing, absolutely amazing. And I said, listen, Tanmay, I need to connect with you, and I need to have a conversation that matters. And I need to have a conversation about the state of leadership. So the one on the left was the first one I did, and I started to send it out to the world a few years ago. It had about 8,000, 15,000 views, and it started and generated a lot of conversation and a lot of dialogue. Then I started going to the one on the right, Fired Leadership. And again, that's had thousands of views, people interested in everything that this is about, right? And on the right-hand side, I've started to kind of really do some cool things, right? Let me just take a couple of these. John Spence, the world's #1 strategic thinker about leadership. He's now on my network. In fact, I'll tell you about what some of the things I'm doing with John later. But again, focused hustle, reached out to the global gurus list of thought leaders. I want to be an influencer and a difference maker in what I'm doing. So who do I approach? Well, I could approach the top 50, top 100 and do them in, reverse order. My nature, I just went for the top person. So I went for the top person was John Spence. Got him straight away, had a conversation. And you know why? Because what you're seeing now is 7:30 in the morning. You can't fake this shit. This is passion. This is interest. This is intrigue. Everybody says it will never work. I'll do it anyway, because my litmus test for what I was doing, I don't care if it's the Francesca Ginos, the Whitney Johnsons, the John Spences, the Marshall Goldsmiths, all gurus in their field. They're all human, and they all have the same insecurities. And I'm doing this anyway, regardless if anyone listens or not. And it just so happens they're starting to listen. And they're all now in the network that I mentioned earlier that I've created. These 2 podcasts, I've been on about 35 podcasts so far. These 2 I've just referenced here are in the top 1.5% globally for business and leadership podcasts. Think about that. Back to the previous slide. That'll never work. But I had an idea, a vision to change the world, to change the game, to change the narrative. Now these people are inviting me on their podcasts. I'm just a poor boy from Shepherd's Bush, West London, who shouldn't have been alive this long. But I'm changing people's minds, making a difference. Now I'm on the radar for Thinkers 50, Thinkers 1, Thinkers 360. These are all platforms to get thought leaders' ideas and thinking out into the world. Now, of course, there are some on it that are doing it for exposure and commercial gain. And there is and there will be more of that. But for me, it's about having a conversation, one conversation at a time. And wherever you are in your career, at whatever point you are, if you take nothing else from this conversation, then know that whatever you're doing can make a difference. You can change your world. You can have that ripple effect, because I have had that ripple effect, and we're continuing to have that ripple effect. So accidentally reinventing the future of leadership. I mean, this is where I am, guys, girls. I set out 3-4 years ago with this idea to, if one person benefited from what I was doing, then it would be amazing and I could die happy. Then I had this other crazy idea. What about if I could reach 1 million people? What about if 1 million people could become aware of Fired Leadership? Well, so far we're trending at about 900,000. And I'm on about 2 to 4 podcasts every week on average. as I said, 35, 40 podcasts. I've done one-on-one live streams. I've been on the Rebellion a few times. There are 3 books in the making. The first book, as we speak, is doing the dance with the traditional publisher circuit. Wiley, at the last point, my agent told me you're interested in having a conversation with me about the first book. There's 3 books coming on. I'll talk a bit more about the book shortly. There's videos, done about 40 plus videos that are all in post-production. Some of them are out in the system already. And so slowly but surely, look at that image on the right. This is about connecting. This is about focused hustle and connecting and creating conversations that matter, so that more conversations that matter happen. Right. So think about that as you go through your world. How can you touch people? How can you have an impact on them that makes a difference? And it starts one conversation at a time. I told you about being grounded, and being grounded is really key. Jeff, Beth, forgive my kind of leveraging your values here, but I thought it was an interesting exercise, because all of you that are on this session and all of you that are listening to this post will be aligned with these 4 core rebel values, right? Rebellion values. And when Jeff, myself, and Dale have been talking, over the last, Jeff and myself over the last few months, but I've known Dale for a few years, it's so clear to me that we're aligned because we want to change the game. Everything we do is about changing the game. But underpinning that, it's about serving others, right? So I've got this panel conversation coming up with a great bunch of people as well shortly after this, to talk about servant leadership, and what does being in service mean. And so everything the Rebellion does, I can testify, is about being in service to others. And so when I think about what I'm doing, for those that are diligent will notice there's a spelling error on one of my values here. But herding elephants for me is, I like to talk about the elephant in the room in order to have the conditions for honest and transparent conversations. So everything I do is driven by having open and honest conversations that matter. And you'll realize more and more why that it does matter. I give people a voice that otherwise might not be heard. I've worked with the C-suite. I've put the fancy 1-page laminates on the wall that never get adhered to. I've been in your shoes. I've been at that leadership level. I've been on the ground in the trenches. And I know sometimes people don't feel heard. The career aspirations we have, the quota-driven culture, have to meet these quotas. Otherwise, my sales leader is going to be really annoyed at me. Right? I've been there. I understand the voice and the quiet dissent that's brewing. So the work I do helps those 2 levels. It helps that leadership, senior leadership, C-suite, to change their narrative, to be open to possibility. And it helps others that are the leadership entry level or just day-to-day talent that are keeping the lights on and doing the absolutely important work to keep the engine running. I hear you, and I create the platform for that as well. I've been in your shoes. And I do all of this because I'm intentionally trying to disrupt. There's a definition, disruption. When we think about disruption, maybe not everyone on this line at the moment, but most people I speak to about disruption think about it in a negative way. And so I'm on a mission as well to reframe our understanding of disruption. And I want to reframe from this normalized dysfunction that we have in the world of leadership to normalized disruption, which means I have to reframe the way we see disruption from a negative to a positive. And we're well on trend and tracking to do that. And now, again, ideas are changing the world, and your ideas can change the world. And one of the things that I do is stir things up in organizations, not to be that irritating mosquito, but to get people to think differently, think outside the box. In fact, to blow up the box, to say, do we need a box? Does the future require us to have a box? So when you think about application of whatever I'm saying to you, there's a way that you can individually take these messages and blow up your own box, figuratively, not literally. All right, the middle. Does anyone want to come off mute and kind of give me their perspective so far? Kind of, tell me something, give me an insight, challenge me, question me. If not, that's okay. It's not mandatory, but I'm curious because I normally love to see my audience. So I love to engage with them, and so I can't see anyone. So anyone, hit me up if you want to. But completely understand if you're making tea, going to the washroom, checking your emails, checked out. I understand, being there as well. All right, it should look like this. This is what exemplary leadership should look like. Some of the gurus in the field, you'll see the book on the left. I can again pass that on as part of the post activity. But you should be unified around a purpose. You should have shared goals. You should be collaborating and mutually dependent. Someone's put something in the chat. All right, cool. Jeff, I'm on fire. I don't know. I'm always like this. There's no off switch for me. It just seems like this is the way I am. And it took a while for it to be accepted, but it's being accepted in the world. But everything is creating a climate of trust, right? So this is what it should look like. But let me tell you what it does look like now. This is the cost every year, and that's rising, of disengagement. Leadership level disengagement, non-leadership disengagement. This number was 7 trillion when I started tracking this 2 or 3 years ago. That was by Gallup. So there's a problem. People are not being engaged at work. 1 in 4 of your high performance or high potentials is considering leaving right now. 14% of CEOs feel that they've got the right talent to execute their strategy. Think about that. 14%. That's from DDI. They did the world's largest global leadership effectiveness research. That's how much money is spent every year on leadership development. That 14%, by the way, is the percentage of that think that investment in 366 billion works, i.e. 86% of people who buy leadership development do not think it works. Again, from DDI. Right now, that's the cost. This is various sources, but this is the cost to replace leader level talent who either voluntarily leave your organization because they're disengaged or they're fired. In fact, no research exists on the global costs of involuntary turnover. Paul Mac Leadership is doing the first global study and research into that subject. And I can guarantee you it's going to be in the trillions. But 213 to 400% of your base salary is the cost to replace a leader that voluntarily leaves. Doesn't include non-financial costs, doesn't include litigation, doesn't include healthcare benefits, pension. Doesn't include the impact on the client, the reputation that you leave behind, the morale of the team that you leave, the productivity of that team. Those costs are incalculable, right? This is pretty much its own pandemic. But rest assured, rebels, the future is in our hands. And one of the leading executive leadership search firms, and there are others, I just pulled this out as part of research I'm doing for my first book, which was a couple of years ago now, but the second book is leveraging more of this. The ability to disrupt and challenge has the strongest effect on leadership potential, right? You can see the hypocrisy of leadership. You can see the way that the system hasn't really been embracing. But you've got one of the top executive leadership firms in the world telling us that disruption is the key to the future of leadership and to develop leadership potential. There are more studies I can reference. I'm not going to bore you, but the message is we are the future. That is a key message to take away. All right. Fired leadership. What is it? Why have I done this? I think you know why I've done this. But I just want to lift the hood and I just want to give you a little bit of a taster. And again, I can share all this for those that might want to take notes or if we rush through anything, but rest assured we'll have some information at the end that we can share. I was stupid and crazy enough to think that I could reinvent the future of leadership from a basement, playing ping pong in a windowless room, eating pizza, because I got curious about why I was fired. And I looked for common denominators, and I was the common denominator. And so my crazy idea that I mentioned earlier was, I wonder if that's true or not. So I set on a research task of researching thousands of different leadership programs around the world. And I realized that these 5 qualities are missing from the way we develop leaders. And yet, the recruitment process was asking, not in these terms for these qualities, but asking for the essence the identifiers of these qualities to be demonstrated in the recruitment process and as part of being a leader. Are you seeing the hypocrisy here? Are you seeing the disconnect? So I started thinking I was crazy enough to change the conversation. So we created the Fired Leadership Framework, and all of these things inside this framework, we have more assets behind the scenes, and we've developed kind of diagnostics and questions and all sorts of great things. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because what I want to talk about is the area that I've highlighted today, which is the defining of the fired qualities. What is fired, right? What is fired leadership, right? Well, pretty much the first one is fresh thinking, right? So this is approaching things from a different perspective, having the courage to think and act and dare to think and act differently, being unafraid to ask, being unafraid to take risks, having this desire to improve, always challenging the status quo. By the way, some of the perceptions of leaders that have these qualities are that they are annoying. They always ask why. They're that pesky mosquito. They just won't let things lie. It worked till you came along. Why don't you leave it the way it is often the moniker that we're told when we're fresh thinkers. But guess what? Fresh thinking is the foundation that leads to the ability to be disruptive, which leads to the ability to be innovative, which leads to changing the game. So without fresh thinking entrenched in the way we lead, we can't do any of that very well. So I've started to think about fresh thinking as one of the core qualities of a fired leader. Inquisitive nature. Francesca Gino, in her work Rebel Talent and the Business Case for Curiosity in Harvard Business Review, talks about curiosity. I've taken it one step further, and I've kind of said, well, they're always asking why. They have this unquenchable thirst, always inspired by new ideas. And to leverage Carol Dweck's work, fixed versus growth mindset, they always come at it from a growth mindset, from a beginner's mindset. Humble, they're in service. There's no ego in these fired leaders' body at all. So inquisitive nature is the second. Real and accountable. How many times we heard, got to be authentic, got to be transparent, got to be vulnerable. Well, fired leaders do what they say on the tin. They practice what they preach. They don't care about norms and etiquette because these are contrived boxes that we fit within. They don't wear a mask, so they refuse to wear a mask. They're the same person. Jeff, I'm the same person. I speak to you and with you the way I am now as I am offline, off backstage, to the janitor in the swimming pool. Doesn't matter. We are congruent, right? We are congruent in everything we do. And we're accountable for being real to ourselves. And that's the key thing here, being accountable for being real. Why wouldn't you if you were being real? Why wouldn't you want to be accountable to being real? Expressive and challenging. They're the first to ask questions. So imagine this, you're new to your team. Many of you might be new to your team right now. And there's groupthink that's happening in the team. You're in a team meeting. Oh, I can't say that because everybody's zigging. I want to zag, right? They've done it this way, but I know from my experience that this way is the better way. How many of us placate to the groupthink? A lot of us, which leads to the disengagement that I mentioned earlier. But we're the first to put our hands up, question and challenge from a place of wanting to move things forward, never to be that annoying mosquito, always purpose driven, not ego driven. And we create that space for others to hear us and for us to hear them, right? We want to get to the bottom of things, so we go deeper, and we always do it in a kind, professional, respectful, courteous way, but be under no illusion. We want to move the game forward, and we don't suffer fools gladly. Ego is not our friend. Direct and transparent. We don't play the political game and we cut through the crap. We don't buy into the established norms. We say what we mean what we say. I'll tell you a story about that at the end if we have time. But we don't have an agenda. Lack of personal agenda or political agenda. Everybody on this call and listening to this in retroactively has the decision to make every single day whether they play the political game. So whether you've just started in a sales role or whether you're a new sales leader and you're keen to impress, let your work speak for you. Don't play the political game because it's going to cost you so much in the long run with your health, stress, burnout, productivity, perception. I could go on and on. Be you. All right. Fired leadership kind of has, in fact, let me go back. Does anybody have anything that they want to kind of comment on around this? Again, this is a quiet group, but that's fine. Because normally at this point, I get a lot of people asking loads of questions. So I want to give someone the opportunity. Mike's come on. Hey, Mike, you have to take yourself off mute, I think.
That'll probably be helpful, right?
Hello.
I felt, I guess, can you hear me right?
I can, yeah.
All right, cool. I want to at least say something. So I am in a job search right now after being laid off due to coverage overlaps, but don't need to go into that so much. But my curiosity is, these things are all great, and I like to think I try to lean towards these all the time. But when landing somewhere new, right? Obviously, some of these maybe are easier to express than others, but I guess what advice do you have for someone when they're starting new if they feel like they may have been in a similar circle to you with a few either firings or layoffs that probably weren't the right decision by the company? When going to yet another new spot, is there anything you should highlight within this, or just ride this true to the end and just stay I guess, fired up, as you will?
Well, I think you've got to ask yourself why you're being fired in the first place and whether the culture is responsible for part of that, right? And that's what I did. So I didn't just repeat. So I was, the one constant was me, and I was congruent to the qualities that I had. I didn't know they were these qualities at the time because, I was the guy that asked questions. I was always looking for answers. I looked at the common themes around me as a leader, and for so long, I'd been made to think that they were wrong, but they were actually what the future needed. And I stood in my morals and my grounding that no, this is who I am as a leader, and we're not teaching this stuff at leadership level. And so why am I going to change to fit into yet another dysfunctional, broken model? I'm not going to do it. So there's a personal choice that one has to make. I get it when you're new to a team, like I was new to a partner level in a big consulting firm, and the day before they hired me, they poached me. They were a former client. They poached me. I went in and joined them, and basically they were my client. Then they became my boss, but I was the same level as them. And before I started going out, to the world with the game face on, well, in fact, there is no game face. This is me. They said how much they respected me and all this, and they could learn from me. The moment the camera went on and we were in the team meeting, but they were the leader. Just before we went into the meeting, they said, "Remember, Paul, I'm your boss." And I was like, nah. So bear in mind, when I went into the meeting, when someone says, "Do you have any questions?" If the partner comes up with the idea, no one says anything. That's groupthink. That's a culture of fear right there. Because if they say, "Can you challenge this idea?" And if no one does it, there's a fear culture, right? So I'd be asking myself that, right? Why do you need to adapt your style to go into another kind of culture that doesn't suit your morals and your approach? So when I was asked if I had any challenges or any difference of opinion with that idea in that meeting, it was my first meeting with this new company. I said, yeah, I do. And I could see everybody, with 20 people in the room, I could see them going like this. Oh no, his card's marked. And my card was marked. But again, for highlighting the hypocrisy of leadership, don't ask me to contribute, and then when I do, blacklist me. So my message to you, Mike, would be stand in who you are, right? Be proud of everything that you are and what you represent, because you're ruffling feathers in some way, and that's a strength and an asset for forward-moving, progressive organizations. So happy to chat offline as well if you want to chat more.
Yeah, I'll let you get back at it. I really appreciate it. This
no problem.
Speaking to me.
No problem. Anytime. So we do a bunch of different ways to bring fired leadership to life. You can find out about them offline. We can talk another time about that. I don't want to kind of use this too much to kind of show what I do, but suffice to say, I speak about this stuff. I do diagnostic assessments. I come in to help our organizations understand how ready they are for fired leadership. I have a bunch of programs. In fact, the Rebellion and us, we're kind of talking about some of that at the moment to trial some stuff in cohorts. And I do advisory work like mentoring and coaching. We've created coaching and mentoring programs around the fired methodology. And we meet organizations where they are at any one point in time with one of these modalities or more. But suffice to say, it started from an idea and it germinated, and it's becoming a commercialized practice that's helping people to unveil some of the dysfunction that they have already in the organization that they're starting to see. All right, let's make this practical. We've got about 20 minutes left, but let's make this practical. You've heard me talk about this concept that you've probably never heard of before. And you might be sitting there, you might be a chief people officer, a VP, a director, you might be a leader of some description, I don't know. But if you are, I've got two approaches. One, if you're at that kind of level, and the other, if you're new to a role, if you're looking for a role, if you kind of building up your career, I've got some tips and techniques that might be able to help you. And again, don't need to take notes unless you want to, but I can share all this behind the scenes. So the idea of this is to basically create the environment. So if you look at creating the environment to introduce fired leadership into your organization, if you're a leader of description of VP, Chief People Officer, CEO, whatever level you are of that seniority, start by assessing your own leadership culture. And remember, create the conditions to have an honest conversation about it. You might want to rally around some HR folks, some heads of departments, but have an honest conversation about the state of your leadership culture. Well, like, why are people leaving? Are they leaving because they're not developed? Is the development not working? Are we not listening to what they need? But crunch the numbers, get an idea of the lay of the land first, right? You know your organization, and you know if you've got a challenge and where the challenges are. But figure out by understanding the current state before you start to create the environment. Then kind of move to the developing of the environment. And this is where I'd say review, your approaches to leadership development. So if you've got a competency framework, if you've got a suite of programs at different levels, go through management training, leadership training, staff level training, review how much that costs, review the effectiveness of it. And when I say the effectiveness, I mean two things. Any learning and development has to do two things. And if it doesn't, it fails. It has to increase your skill set in some way, and that skill set has to lead to sustainable behavior change. Think about that. That's a pause moment. And if your learning and development doesn't do that, then you have to have another conversation. Now, learning and development should be tied to a leadership strategy, right, or talent development strategy. 40% of organizations surveyed out of thousands don't have a strategy in place. So they're putting pins in balloons that they can't even see in the dark around how to develop their leaders and talent. That's another point to think about. So if your organization is like that, you are not alone. Put together an alignment plan, a fancy title for basically saying getting people around the table who have something to say and are interested in investing and developing a different approach to leadership and talent development, and create a step-by-step plan. You can identify where these qualities already exist in the way you develop your staff. Don't pay an expensive consultant like me to come in and do a talent and skills and competency audit. Do this. Take a piece of paper like this. Along the top, write your competencies that you have, right? Along the bottom left-hand side, down the left-hand side, write the fired qualities. Put a matrix, a grid together. Then take a pen like this and look at whether your existing competencies or skills that you develop people by aligns to which of the fired qualities. At the end of that, you have now mapped your skill set, your competencies against the fired framework. That thing that I just told you would cost you about $50,000 to do. If you paid me, you could do it in 10 minutes with a sheet of paper. Audit those programs, right? So when you see a connection with the fired qualities and your competencies or your skills that you have now, go and take those programs out of wherever they are and look at them and look at how effective they are. And when I say effective, look at how effective they are for meeting your talent's current needs and future needs, right? Do you even ask your talent and leaders what they want to learn? I bet you don't, because you take out a cut and paste cookie cutter pathway that worked 700 years ago and you apply it to the way you develop staff now. It doesn't work. So you've got an opportunity to do an audit as you're developing this environment. And then if you're kind of implementing this and putting this into sustainment mode, do a couple of these things, right? Start to think about where the fired qualities can be integrated into the profiles, the job descriptions. So, Mike, I know you just spoke, so you're in my memory. As you look for new roles, if these fired qualities jazz you up and you get excited by them and you think, that's me, I can do that, I want to develop in that area. Start to look for role profiles and job descriptions where those qualities are within. They won't be the way I portrayed them in terms of the name, the lexicon, but look for the characteristics. And if those things excite you, start to apply for those roles. But also with those role profiles in your organization, where you've mapped the qualities to your existing way of developing staff, update your profiles, right? Then start to get your HR folks on board to change the way you interview. You identify, recruit, onboard, and develop your talent using the fired qualities as questions, as coaching questions, as ways to assess talent, right? Offer new coaching, fired coaching for all new talent leaders that come in the door. Research shows that 90% of onboarding is just picking up your laptop, doing your HR paperwork, doing your IT stuff. Full onboarding should be understanding the culture, introducing you to the way things work around here, and your contribution to that culture. Now you're evolving it. That's what onboarding should look like, but it doesn't. And then when you're sustaining this, you want this to be part of your DNA. This is the way we do things around here. Remember, that'll never work too. Why can't we now not do this? So we need to create an environment where fired leadership and the qualities become embedded into how you turn up, right? So learning hubs such as execution labs. I did this with a client recently as well. Take two trial projects, put one of them through the regular approach to leadership development and how staff work, and put another through the fired lab. And you heard me right. Get the fired lab to focus on everyone in that project expressing these qualities and see what impact it has on the productivity of the team, the quality of the outputs, and the sustainability of the work and the engagement and the reduced turnover that your environment has. It will blow your mind, right? We're collating percentages and stats and all of that stuff so that I can share that information as part of client case study work. Have monthly corners where you talk about these qualities and how they've showed up, what worked, what didn't work, how can you build on them, how can you leverage best practices from your peers, from your direct reports, from your bosses, but create that culture and you start to sustain an environment. And so these are things you can do if you're at that kind of senior leadership level. What about if you're in a day-to-day grind, you've got to pay the bills, you've got mortgages to pay, you've got your boss breathing down your neck, you've got quotas to fulfill, all that good stuff. Well, you might want to take a screenshot of this because I'm not going to have time to go through all of it. And you might also want to then print it out and rate yourself according to what you would feel comfortable to do. I've taken each quality and I've given you about 2 to 4 things that you might want to do as an activity. By the way, the first book, as an aside, section 3 of the book basically offers a soup to nuts roadmap of all the things that you can do in the creating the environment, developing it, implementing it, and sustaining it. I think we have close to 100 activities that many leadership authors and scholars said, why are you giving your game away? I'm like, because I'm in service to others, right? Because I want to help people and open source the future of leadership. So these are just a few snippets from the first book, which kind of has a plethora of other things you can do to make this practical for you as a takeaway, right? So fresh thinking. Let me just take 1 or 2. British Airways in the 90s threw out their customer service handbook, right? So when they engaged on the call centers, they were finding that the call center staff were demotivated, they disengaged, they left, and the customer wasn't getting a satisfactory answer. So guess what they did? They threw out the rule book and they let the customer call center staff have a conversation that matters with the person calling. They did it in a way that wasn't scripted. They built a genuine relationship. They didn't try and solve the client's solution problem. They asked them about what they wanted to do differently. You could take a similar approach in sales. I know Dale's been banging on about that for a few years, and that's what helps to create genuine sales relationships. So think about what might work for you. Have genuine organic conversation that matters with people that you're trying to approach and work with. Look for a new way that you can introduce a different way of thinking. Right. So if you're new, Mike, if you're new, again, I'm picking on you, Mike, no need to come off mute. But if you're in a new setup, a new team, and you want to see what the culture's like, so ask a question that's different than the rest of the people and see the response you get. That will give you a pulse check on the culture. Don't pay a consultant like me to do a culture audit. That question and the way it's answered and the body language of everyone in the room and the boss will tell you everything you need to know about the culture that you're walking into and whether or not fresh thinking is encouraged in that organization. Inquisitive nature, make it a habit of asking why. Why do we do things? Like the 5 whys, practice the 5 whys, right? So always ask, dig deeper. And by the way, on the right hand side, there's considerations that you might want to think about as you take one of the activities that might resonate for you. Real and accountable. This is a good one. I love this one, which I'm going to talk about. Set up regular one-on-ones with your boss. This could be a CEO, whoever it is, right? On a regular basis. Again, you're putting this into the culture. Set up a regular one-on-one with your leader and get them to tell you, like, how can you be more real and accountable, and have a conversation about it and create a checklist from that, so that when you have a conversation, when you have these regular conversations, you're using that checklist so you're both figuring out, am I being real here? Am I being accountable? And only you will know what that means for you. But set that up, because so many people think they're being real in the workplace and they're just faking it. Name what you see moments in the expressive and challenging area. I finished working with a finance client recently. They were the largest finance wealth creation company in Canada. And I got them trying name what you see moment tool with their leadership team. And it was basically, when you're in a meeting, it could be with your leaders, it could be with your peers. If you have your weekly check-in meetings, take the opportunity to do a round robin and call out where you're seeing perhaps dysfunctional or ineffective behavior of each team member, including yourself. Then as a team, prioritize the one behavior, the one scenario that's having an impact on the way you work together and your outputs and your morale. Then prioritize that one thing in between the next time you meet, right, to address. And then use the next meeting to kind of go through what you did, what came out of it. I guarantee you, like this other client that I've worked with this tool, the morale improved, the productivity of their team increased, and they were able to work together in a much more effective way. Try it. You'll be amazed at what happens. And then the direct and transparent, right? Every morning, if you've got teeth, I imagine every morning you brush your teeth, right? Or you brush your teeth at the end of the night. Every morning you have the power within you to change the world. And so when you look in the mirror in the morning, you have the opportunity to ask yourself a question. Am I going to play the political game today or not? And think about that. And think about the impact of playing the game versus not, and being congruent with who you are, right? Only you will know what that means for you, right? If you're getting divorced, if you've got bills to pay, you might think you need to play the political game, but you don't. But again, it's a personal decision. So there's some tips, techniques, some things to consider that I would encourage you, if you haven't already, take a screenshot of this and rate yourself and say, you know what, no way am I going to do this. I would never do that. Or bring it on. Hell yeah, I'm up for this. I'm going to apply this right now in my next team call, in my next sales meeting, whatever it is. And so try it and start taking data points. See how you are now when you do it. Take a snapshot in 3 months from now. See how you are then. And I guarantee you there'll be a difference. So on to the next area. I just want really you to reflect. Don't have to come off mute. Don't have to tell me unless you want to in the chat box. But this is basically how everybody experiences change and transformation. It's actually based on a bereavement cycle. I've adapted it for transformation and the way that people start to embrace fired leadership and this new way of reinventing leadership, right? So you'll know where you are on this, right? And this is not linear. It will change. So you might be really pumped and really wanting to try some new stuff. and you think this is critical and you want to go and put it into your organization right now, or at least try and drip feed some stuff. So you're probably more towards the right-hand side. But you might be thinking, there's no way I can do this, right? There's no way that I could introduce this. The organization isn't ready. I'm not ready. Doesn't matter, no judgment. Wherever you are along this continuum is fine. But just take that moment now to reflect where you are, because I know that this is a journey. I know it's a lot to take in, and I know I fluctuate on a regular basis between these, because there are days where I think there's no way I can change the world, and then when I have conversations with C-suite that say, you know what, you're really onto something, I'm like, yeah, bring it on. I'm pumped. I know that this is doing what it's doing, and the impact, and my reason, my why. We need to lead a better way. And the reason why I think that's really important is because long after I'm dead and gone, and long after you're all dead and gone, there'll be future leaders out there. And I want to create the conditions so that the future leaders that aren't even born yet never have to experience the dysfunction and be a contribution to those stats and facts that I showed. And they're increasing, by the way, when they become leaders. Because we want, like, this takes generations to do. To change takes a long time, but we can start now. 2 stories very quickly. Mr. C, he's my uncle on the left. Say what you mean and mean what you say. I thoroughly believe that in life. That's my approach, my reason for being, my purpose, and the way I approach every kind of work that I do with clients, and my reason for being, and how I approach leadership. So thank you, Mr. C. The second is the wolf. Wolves are alphas, and in order for wolves to mate two alphas, one of them has to demonstrate vulnerability. And the way that they show vulnerability is to show their neck. And when a wolf shows their neck, then basically they can start the mating process. In order to do anything that I've talked about today, these 2 stories emulate very clearly in my mind. Don't do something. Don't say something unless you're going to do something about it. Don't say something unless you mean it. And in order to do any of this, you have to be vulnerable, which means more than just that nice buzzword that we put on the laminate wall-mounted mission statement. It means reflecting. Every way you show up is a reflection of your attitude and your approach in life. So the question I have for you is, what are you prepared to do? And so the wolf is a great reminder that I get leaders to think about, because you can all talk the talk. How do you actually walk the talk? So think about that. And this is by Nat Creative. If you're ever in Banff, Alberta in Canada, a small, glorious mountain time, she's a graphic designer. I fell in love with this image, and I've been using it ever since for work I'm doing with dysfunctional leadership teams to get them to change their mindsets. They can be vulnerable and it not be something of a sign of weakness. In fact, it's one of the most important leadership qualities that we'll need going forward. And it's again, my real and accountable. Vulnerability is imbued in that. All right. If you want to stay in touch with me, you can QR code this, snapshot this now with your phone. We'll send this out. But you know what I'm trying to do, and by the way, I'm on the Slack channel with the Rebels as well, so you can always DM me through Dale or Jeff. You can stay in touch with me. You can go to my website. You can subscribe to be notified when the book comes out. That's great, but why bother? That I don't really need the likes or the metrics, and that's one-sided. You can do that if you want, but I want to create the conditions for us to do something that moves things forward, right? So I'm creating a movement, as I said, and I've been saying throughout. So you can just subscribe and have that annoying alert when the book comes out, but that's futile. You can just connect with me on LinkedIn one-on-one, and then you can grow your numbers, I can grow my numbers, but I'm not interested in that. I don't really care about that, right? You can connect with me on LinkedIn, you can send me a message, and you could drop in that message someone that you think I should talk to, as someone who would really resonate with what we've been talking about today. That's great. We're starting to build a community, because on the left-hand side, the book and just connecting with me, we're just building a fan club. It's got no substance. On the right-hand side, we're starting to create a community. But guess where I'm heading? we can create a movement, right? So let's start to think about who can benefit from these conversations, and let's start to connect with them, right? That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing for. And I think really with that, oh, there is one more slide. I've got 1 minute left. If you do connect with me and you do follow me and you do want to chat with me, and you'll see what I'm up to next. Jeff, I think someone's put in the chat show. I did a podcast that's in the top. With Dale, that's a great podcast. I think more viewers listen to that than anyone else in the network, if I'm not mistaken. I've got podcasts that are coming out as well that are in the top 1.5%. They've just dropped on LinkedIn. Coming up next for me, I'm speaking. I put this other crazy idea out, and I know I'm about to go over time, so please forgive me by 1 more minute. I put this crazy idea out to one of the top 1% thinkers and influencers on LinkedIn, Dr. Abe Corres and John Spence, right? Remember I told you about him earlier. I said, what about, because I see all these practitioners having these conferences and they just want to promote their book and they just want to promote their speaker sessions and their programs. And we're all capitalists. We're all in this to generate money. But I'm a capitalist with conscience, right? My alarm just went off, right? So I want to generate revenue and difference and impact, but do it in a way that's thoughtful, purpose driven. So I said to these guys, I've got this crazy idea. I see all these conferences that are self-grandializing and narcissistic and all of this. Why don't we create a conference where we talk about the future of leadership and don't bring our ego or try and promote our book or speaker note, whatever it is, and just focus on the concept, the conversation. And they loved it. So that's coming up on the 8th of November. There's another one coming up on October the 8th, which you're all welcome to subscribe to. But come to this one at November the 8th. There'll be an invite that goes out. That's something I'm doing. I'm coming up and talking with TD Bank, one of Canada's largest banks, about the future of work. And I'm doing more stuff with the Rebellion. Jeff and I are going to be chatting about that. So super pumped, super excited. I'm 1 minute over and I'm done.
It was perfect. It was incredible. I can only tell you that you and I, my friend, are cut from the same cloth. I did a servant leadership thing yesterday, and a lot of it was, I talked about the servant leadership stamp of approval and how a lot of people can use words that they don't understand, and that a lot of people miss the servant first concept, right? And so, again, everything that you're saying sets me on fire. I love that you're at this high level doing it, right? So I have tons of notes here, man, and the tons of stuff that I want to talk about, but we got like 2 minutes, right? Because Jeremiah's going to go on at 11:35. But one thing I wanted to say, because this was I think it's relevant for people, is this pin the tail on the donkey leadership development strategy. That's what I like. It just resonated with me so much. We're in the dark, trying to throw darts at the wall, not really understanding truly what direction we're trying to go in the first place. And the fact that we're having these conversations now, again, there's the timing is aligning for these types of conversations, for change in leadership, for change in perspective. But it is, like you talked about in the beginning, the reputation and, oh, this will never work. And why are you doing that? And all this stuff. And just having this conviction to understand, like, this is true. And I think that this is very true about the way the Sales Rebellion was developed, right? There's this conviction about the way that things can be. And there's this narrative around how it's not possible. And it is possible. It absolutely is possible. It's hard work. It's going to disrupt things. These are very true answers. True. These are very true arguments. But is it possible? Yes. And is it the most noble endeavor? Yes. And should we seek to do it with everything we have, And so for me, I am very excited about the things that'll come out from our collaboration and the work that you're doing, man, because it's important, the whole generational aspect of leadership. It's not just about us, There are other people that need this information. Go ahead.
You're right. It's never been about us. It's always been about a future that, like, firstly, if you can imagine a different future, then the second thing is you can create it.
Yeah. Right.
So the future that you create has been developed twice. The first time in your mind, and now the second time in reality.
I love
So
that so much. Excited to
that's-
collaborate. Thank you so much.
Pumped.
Thank
So
you so much. Go ahead.
no problem. So I'm back on the panel, but I can kind of like tune into the other session, or maybe I'll just drop off and come back.
Yeah, you're welcome to take a break. We're gonna go with Jeremiah. Cool. He's got 20 minutes. There are some like tables out there, you know, or you can see the session. But yeah, we've got a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll come back with the conversation. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you so much. Happy to chat with anyone offline. If they connect with me, if they see this replay, reach out. I'm here.
Yes, connect with Paul. Go get fired up. Not necessarily fired yet, right? But fired up, right? Leadership.
Yeah. So
this is so important, right?
So take a screenshot if you want or not. But I'll share this deck with you, Jeff. So no problem there. Cool.
Perfect. We'll attach it to the replay.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing behind the scenes as well. Really appreciate it.
Ditto, my friend.
All right, mate. Great.